Well, good evening. If you've got your Old Testaments, be opening up to Judges chapter 17. Judges chapter 17 is where we'll be taking our lesson from this evening. He doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to ask Brother John McCants to open us up with a word of prayer. Beginning in Judges chapter 17, the book really takes a drastic change to the way in which it's been written. Up until this point, generally from Judges chapter 3 and onward, we've been dealing with specific judges, and if not a major judge, at least a minor judge each evening. But tonight we begin what I look at as really, appendix to the book. It's kind of just, they're thrown at the end of the book of Judges, but I don't believe chapters 17 through 21 come at the end of it chronologically. I think, especially when we're looking at chapters 17 and 18, because even what's talked about in chapters 17 and 18 is even mentioned back in Joshua chapter 19. So it seems to me that we're probably looking at something that would have happened very early in the time period of the Judges, and then even depending on how we want to look at it with chapters 19 through 21, we're still probably looking at something at least earlier than Jephthah, earlier than Samson, possibly even earlier than they would have been as judges in Judah, or in Israel. When we think about the greatest threat to Israel during the period of the Judges, who was Israel's greatest threat? All right, the Philistines. Who else? All right, Brother Ron, you hold on to that one. Well, the Philistines, the Midianites, the Ammonites, all of those other countries that they failed to drive out, they become the thorns in the side. They become their enemies, and they seemingly are the obstacles that Israel continues to trip over. But really and truly, I think chapter 17 through 21 shows us that their greatest enemy wasn't the outside enemies. It was themselves. It was their own internal struggles, their own heart problems that they were dealing with there and amongst them. And that's what we see here specifically beginning in chapter 17. Now, we're not looking at this cycle tonight. Again, this cycle is not really what we're looking at this evening, because we're moving beyond that now into these few chapters at the end of the book. But we are going to be looking at, primarily we're going to be looking at the country of Dan. In chapter 17, Dan is going to make his way north to Laish, or to what he would later rename Dan. And then next week, we're going to still be in the hill country of Ephraim. If I can come back down just a little bit. The hill country of Ephraim. We're going to come down to Bethlehem, and then comes back up to Gibeah. And if you can see Gibeah right there, should be right in the center of that. So that's where we're going to be at for these 2 weeks together. I really don't like splitting it in 17 through, I should have left 19 through 21 as a unit, 17 and 18 as a unit. So if we don't get through and get through chapter 18 at least tonight, and then leave chapter 19 questions for next week, that's not going to offend me, because it's going to help you probably to have those fresh on your mind as we journey into chapters 20 and 21, because it's hard to really understand why 20 and 21 happened without 19 being there. But if we get through all the questions, that's fine. We'll just move along in our study. All right. Well, at the beginning of chapter 17, we're introduced to a new character, and his name is Micah. Who is this individual? What has he stolen? Who cursed that silver, and how did she react to Micah's confession? So instead of just one question, I gave you about 7. All right, so in the hill country of Ephraim. And that seems to be a repetitive thing. I don't know if y'all caught on to that, but if you go all the way back to Ehud in chapter 3 and verse 27, Ehud went to the hill country of Ephraim, and that's where he blew his trumpet to assemble the armies to go against the enemy there. And then in in Judges chapter 4 and verses 4 and 5, it was Deborah who was in the hill country of Ephraim. So the hill country of Ephraim, why do you think so many things happen at the hill country of Ephraim? Let's just go back to the map. Why do you think so much is happening in Ephraim right here? Where is Ephraim?
It's just kind of central to everything else.
All right, and I think it's the central location, and seemingly, why does everything? Because that's typically how things operate. I mean, how many of you think about going to Montgomery very often in Alabama? Because Montgomery's all the way in South Alabama. If we're going to go anywhere in Alabama, until the past few years, what was the largest city in the state? Birmingham, the central location. That's typically how things operate, and that's really what we need to see with the hill country of Ephraim. So, all right, he's an Ephraimite. What else do we know about him? All right. I did not read that in anything. So well, and I guess with the 1,100 pieces of silver. Okay. I think the 1,100 pieces of silver immediately following from chapter 16 is an interesting thing. Why is that repetitive from chapter 16 to chapter 17 if there is no connection between the two? All right. What else do y'all see? All right, he's a thief. And you know what's worse than just being a thief? It's when you steal from who? Your own mama. I mean, that's pretty low down and dirty right there. To steal already, you may have ethical arguments, you may have different things that you want to throw against that, but to steal from your own mom is pretty bad, and that's what Micah has done. All right, now why does Micah, who had cursed the silver? All right, his mom had cursed the silver. And now, depending on how you read that, what exactly is she doing there when she curses the silver? I don't know, but still yet, she's cursed the silver, and that motivates Micah to do what? To tell her the truth, to tell her that I'm the one who stole it. So, really, what motivates Micah's repentance? Is it a worldly sorrow or is it a godly sorrow? He's scared. It's a worldly sorrow. Because his worldly sorrow means nothing, because in the end, he's still going to use that for ill-gotten ways in just a few moments. Now, one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet, but I have on my notes that is interesting to me, is, does anybody know what the name Micah means? Anybody have that in a footnote, possibly just in your reading? Maybe you got one of those study Bibles that does that for you, kind of gives you the meaning of names. The name Micah means who is like Yahweh, who is like the Lord. And that's interesting to me, because here he ought to be someone, because his name bears an honor and praise of the Lord. He should himself be a bearer of the Lord, but we're going to see that he flees from that. Well, then, what did Micah do? How does she react to Micah's confession, and what does he do with the funds that were given to him? All right, so blessed are you, and then I'm going to wholly dedicate the silver from my hand to the Lord. But then, does she wholly dedicate the silver to the Lord? So she says, I'm going to wholly dedicate, but then I'm only going to give you 200, not the entire 1,100. Just the irony there. I think of Ananias and Sapphira a little bit in Acts chapter 5. They say, well, this is the full amount, but it was just a percentage of the amount, not the full amount. And then what does Micah do with that? He takes that and funds his own what? His own religion. And quite often, Brother Frank, I don't know if you're as I am, but kind of when I think about somebody setting up his own religion in the Old Testament, I think about who first? He set up a golden calf in Dan and Bethel. I think about Jeroboam. But Jeroboam wasn't the first one to kick over that can. No, it was Micah who did that. Micah's the one who sets up his own God. He sets up his own priesthood with his own sons who are not Levites. So, I mean, he is just, one step after another. And ultimately, that leads us to that philosophy of life that really defines for us everything that these Israelites are about during this time period. And that's found in 17 and verse 6. It's found again in 18 and verse 1, 19 and verse 1, and 21 and verse 25. And somebody tell me what those verses tell us. All right, so there was no king in Israel, so everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So Micah has stolen from his own mother. Micah has created his own idol. Micah has instituted his own household worship. Mind you, in Deuteronomy chapter 12, God was very specific that I will place my name upon a particular place in Israel, and that is where you are to take your burnt offerings. That is where you're to take your tithes and your sacrifices, to where my name dwells. But here Micah has set up his own. He does not have he has a non-Levite as a priest. And then his mother and himself, they both appear to be sincere in their religious experiences or expressions, maybe a better term here. But they may be sincere in their expressions, but what were they in reality? Sincerely wrong. So again, we think to ourselves that, well, Judges chapter 17 happened thousands of years ago. It happened hundreds of years ago. And because of such, there's no way, there's nothing in Judges chapter 17 that is directly applicable to my life, correct? All right. And what do we have in the 21st century? It just, ignorance comes around every generation, so to speak. It doesn't leave. It is a plague upon man. And oftentimes, and I like Jason how he says it sometimes, ignorance is both something that is just because of the person himself or a willful ignorance. And I think that's probably what we're looking at here, is this is a willful ignorance. It is that I know what's right, but even then I'm still going to do what I want to do. Mm-hmm. He was stingy. Well, and quite often that's what happens with those who have a little bit. All right, so let's look at that gentleman's agreement that happens between Micah and this Levite. So somebody tell me, where did the Levite come from? All right, so the Levite comes from Bethlehem. Guess what Bethlehem is not? How many cities were given to the Levites? Was it 48? I was thinking it was 48 cities were given to the Levites, if my memory serves me correct. Bethlehem's not one of those cities. So what is a Levite doing in Bethlehem? And of course, this is speculation. This is just me reading from a couple of different guys and going, that makes possible sense. It is possible that you look at this young man and he is wandering, he's wandering around Judah and Israel trying to find a place to stay. All right? If the Levite, who are to be taking care of the Levites? Whose responsibility was it to take care of the Levites? The other 11 tribes. The other 11 tribes are supposed to be taking care of the Levites. Well, if the other tribes are making up their own household gods and their own household priesthoods, what are those other tribes not taking care of? The Levites. So why would a Levite be in Bethlehem and just wandering through Israel aimlessly? And why would a Levite then just immediately jump on, oh, here's a paycheck, here's a livelihood, and here's a way to get by?
And I know only ritual.
Yeah, and again, I'm not advocating, I'm not saying that the Levite did right here, but that at least is a possibility. Please understand me that I'm just giving you that as a possibility, something to think about, because that's what I was thinking about. Why is this Levite even doing what he's doing here? And that was given us some possibilities here. All right, so Micah offers him what? To us, and it says to us that he's a young man. It's possible that, how old must you be before you where, and I can give you a little side income that was going to provide for you at least enough that you're going to, and I believe a shekel of silver would be approximately a month's wages, if anybody has something there. But I thought that's what I read when I was studying, and that, so he's making a living off of this. That's what Micah has offered him. That's what he has received. But how does Micah respond to all of this at the end of chapter 7? All right, now I know the Lord will prosper me. Why? All right, so yes, I've already established my own household gods, and yes, I had to establish a priesthood that's not Levitical because I didn't have sons who were Levites. But now that I have a Levite as a priest, now God's going to prosper me. Do you think that the idea of prosperity equals God's blessings is still a thought in the world today? It's never quit, has it? When people prosper, they immediately give that, and they ought to. They get in a form, in a way, they give praise to God and thanksgiving to God for that. But they equate their prosperity with God's blessings and thus God's allowances to whatever it is that they're choosing to do. Now, the question that I would love to be able to ask is at the end of chapter 18, what's Micah's perception of God's blessings now? When the Levite's gone, his household idols are gone, and everything else is gone. Now what do you think, Micah? But we don't have that question answered for us. All right. So now we jump down. Well, first off, any other comments, any other ideas, observations in chapter 17?
Well, evidently, Micah and his mother were well off because their household pursued
Mm-hmm.
the 600 when they took Micah.
Yes, yes. And we'll get there just shortly, but absolutely. They had something to try to get back that had been stolen from them. All right, chapter 18, we have an inquiry of the Lord, or a perceived inquiry. What did the Danites ask of Micah's priest? All right, not just yet. All right. So at the beginning here, it was just, here we've been in a portion of land that we haven't been able to fully take, and we need to go find some more space. So will the Lord prosper us? Will the Lord be with us on our journey? And what do you think Micah's priest is going to say? Sure. Because is he actually going to talk to the Lord about this? No. He's already operating outside the bounds of God's authority. So, you know, if that's what you want to do, again, what's the philosophy of life? Whatever seems to be right, do. And to the Danites, it seemed right for them to pursue a new tribal land, or at least a new additional land. Now let's think about that for a moment. You go back to what they say here. Let's look at what they said. Someone read for us. Let's read verse 2 and 3. All right. Well, what's driving Dan off of their land? Why are they going to search? I guess this was back up into verse 1. I'm sorry there. Thank you for reading that, though. What's driving them northward?
Seeking for more land.
But why are they seeking for more land?
Because their allotment had been given to them or drawn out, but they hadn't taken it.
All right, so go back with me to Judges chapter 1. Judges chapter 1 is the first time that we're introduced to the tribe of Dan, and I think this plays into everything that's happening. If you go back with me to Judges 1 and look with me at verse 34. Judges 1 and verse 34, then the Amorites forced the sons of Dan into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the valley. Now, if you remember with me, I know this is quite a few weeks ago, but what's the point of the latter end of chapter 1 of the book of Judges? It's that Israel never did what? They never took the land. So God, the Lord, by his lots, has allotted them this portion of land. Was that portion of land sufficient? Absolutely. The Lord's the one who gave it to them. He gave it to them. But they didn't do what? They dwelt in the hill. They didn't take control. So that we need some valley. We need some fertile ground. We need to move. We need to find some additional land. So already we're seeing Dan is even setting off with a bad impetus here. They're setting off in a bad way. The 5 valiant men, I want to come back to that in just a little while. But here, so the priest, of course, says, yes, the Lord's approval. You have the Lord's approval. Go do what you want to do. Well, in verses 7 through 12, they've gone, and then they bring back a report. Someone summarized for me the spies' report of the land. All right, it's a good land. It's a good land, and the people that live there are doing what? They're living there securely without any harm. And here we are, we're trying to battle the Amorites who won't even let us go down to the valleys, but if we go up here, we won't have any other enemies. Anything else? All right, so the earth is going to be good, Miss Julia? All right, so think about this. Is there another episode in Israel's history where they sent spies out into the land and they came back with a report? And what did those 12 spies, what did 10 out of the 12 say? We can't take it because there's giants, there's fortified cities, there's walled. We can't take it. But these 5 individuals come back and they say what? We can take it. Why could they take it? Look at verse 10. For God has given it into your hand. Is God even in the midst of this? Is this the Lord's purpose at all? I don't believe it is. I believe this is the tribe of Dan operating entirely based on that philosophy of life, that this is what seems the best for them. That's why they're going to go and do it this way. Exactly. So again, John, you think about that. I mean, how many will get to that throne of judgment and have that same excuse? But I had somebody that told me that I was okay. I had somebody that told me I could do this. All right. Well, that brings us to the second gentleman's agreement. And the only reason I put gentlemen here is because in neither of these cases are these men truly gentlemen. These are vile sinners who are doing sinful things and agreeing to sinful things, but especially in this second one. So the Danites, they pull together 600 men, and they begin to march northward. And as they march, they come into the hill country of Ephraim, and those 5 go what? I've got an idea. What did the 5's idea? What did they want to do? All right, we're going to ask for the advice of the priest again, but really we're going to do something a little bit different this time. We're not just going to ask for his advice. We're going to do what? We're going to take him. We're going to kidnap the priest. And while we kidnap the priest, we're also going to do what to Micah's household? We're going to rob him. We're going to steal everything from him. We're going to take all of his household idols. We're going to take all of his molten images and his graven images. All of those are going to come with us. We are going to take them with us. So the 5 men have returned to Micah's household. They've stolen everything from him. The priest realizes what they're doing, and the priest, what are you guys doing? But then immediately they said what to the priest? Come and be with us. Is it better for you to have one man or an entire nation? An entire tribe at least. Come and be our priest. And of course he just, oh yeah. And now we're beginning to see the true heart of this priest. What is he motivated by? All right, power, greed. He's motivated by anything and everything that would be against, again, what God would desire from those who would serve as his faithful priest. Well, now these men begin to carry them carry them northward, and then when Micah finds out about, no, wait a minute, that's the next question. So let's just go ahead and go to that one. How did Micah respond to the Danites taking his gods and priest? All right, you got to chase after them, right? Because that's who you've been worshiping. Your God is to do what for you? He's to bring what into your household? Prosperity, protection, help. But here your God's been stolen from you. And here he chases after him, and those 600 men draw back down on Micah and tell him to do what? All right, Micah, we've listened to you bark enough. And it's almost like that Chihuahua that all lives in every one of your neighborhoods that every so often you see out next to the side of the road. When you see that dog, what do you really do? Well, first off, you wonder why any human being would ever have a dog such as that in their home and as a pet. But that ankle biter just yapping, and they're turning around and they're like, hey, Micah, look, you need to realize we could squash you real quick. And then Micah does what? He goes back home. He goes back home. And that's where I want to ask the question to Micah is, okay, Micah, just a few moments ago, you were like, hey, the Lord's prospering me. How do you feel now? What's changed? But there's another situation, there's another set of irony here that's interesting to me, and that is what? Does anybody know what I'm thinking right now? I know that many of you are like, no, Colby, we don't know what you're thinking. Your mind is crazy. Thanks for that, Jeff Williams did that. All right. The Danites stole the gods from Micah and his household. Why? Because if we have his gods, then his gods will do what? His gods will give us peace and prosperity. His gods will be with us. But had his gods been with Micah? It didn't work out very well for Micah, so how do you think that's going to work out for you? Now we're beginning to see the foolishness of idolatry. And if you want a fuller extent of this, you could look at Isaiah chapters 40 through 48. Really, Isaiah just deals with that throughout that section. But I do want to go to Isaiah 46. Because I think there's a beautiful contrast between the idols and the gods of the pagans, and even here Micah and his household and the Danites, and the true God of Israel. And I believe this ties us back to Micah. So it's going to be a little bit of a lengthier reading, but I would like for us to read verses 1 through 7 of Isaiah 46. And Taylor, do you mind reading that for us? Isaiah 46, verses 1 through 7.
Bel is bowed down, Nebo scoots over. Their images are consigned to the beasts and the cattle. The things that you carry are burdensome, a load for the weary beast. They stooped over, they have bowed down together. They could not rescue the burden, but have themselves gone into captivity. Listen to me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel. You who have been born by me from birth, and have been carried from the womb, even to your old age I will be the same, and even to your gray years I will bear you. I have done it, and I will carry you, and I will bear you, and I will deliver you. To whom would you liken me, and make me equal? Compare me, that we would be alike. Those who lavish gold from the purse, weigh silver on the scale, hire a goldsmith, he makes it into a god. They bow down, indeed they worship it.
Go ahead in verse 7.
They lifted upon the shoulder and carried it. They set it in its place, and it stands there. It does not move from its place. Though one may cry to it, it cannot answer. It cannot deliver him from his distress.
All right, does verses 6 and 7 really, does that kind of take us back to Micah? One who lavished over gold and silver, the one who went to the silversmith to make him a god, and now that god has been placed in his household, and he has worshiped that god, and he has accredited that god with prosperity and with blessings, but now that god has been done. What has happened to that god? It's been carried off. It's been moved. It's been carried away. And you go back to the beginning of chapter 46 and verses 1 and 2 where you carry your gods from place to place. These heavy burdens, you place them upon the beast of the field, and here are these heavy pieces of stone and pieces of metal that you've created and that you've carved. It is the beast's burden to carry them from place to place, but yet what advantage comes from worshiping those gods other than just being a burden on your shoulders? But think about the contrast that God gives us in verses 3, 4, and 5. God is not a God to be borne by us, but he is the God who bore us. I have borne you from your childhood. I have carried you from the womb. I will carry you. I will deliver you. And then verse 5, to whom would you liken me? What was Micah's name? What did it mean? Who is like Yahweh? So you think about that. The irony here that here the Danites have come in and stolen the household idols of Micah. This was an opportune time for Micah to turn around and to say, maybe I was wrong. Of course, we don't know what he did. All right. Well, what was the name given to the city of Laish, and what was established there? All right, they renamed it Dan, and that makes sense, right? Because that's the tribe of Dan. And then what was established there? The idolatrous practices. So the graven images, Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh. Many of you may have Moses there. So this would have, Jonathan, I do believe, is the name of the Levite that we've been talking about from chapter 17. And he would have been a Levite if he is a grandson or a descendant of Moses. He would have been at least in that Levitical tree. And so all of these things kind of bring themselves together here. But what we have is, why do you think when Jeroboam is going to set up a golden calf, why do you think Jeroboam chose Dan as one of the locations? Because it's already been happening for generations by that time. This idolatrous practice, this illegitimate priesthood, all of these things have already been taking place year after year after year. So that was an easy place for Jeroboam to come in and say, no, this isn't your God. This golden calf is your God. This is the true God who brought you out of Egypt. This is the true. And how easy for idolaters to go, oh, well, we have been wrong. I thought it was the silver angel over here, but I guess we'll worship this golden calf now. Whatever it is. I mean, I'm not saying that it says it's that. Any other conversation, any other observation there? Another little bit of irony. What did the tribe of Dan do to Laish? Completely annihilated it. If Dan would have done that to the tribal lands that had been allotted to them, what would Dan have not had to do? They wouldn't have had to go up north. Again, the irony there is that we've got to move to find another city to. So when I look at the end of chapter 18, I don't think that this is God's will at all. I think the tribe of Dan just killed all of these people illegitimately. I think they murdered them.
You notice the thing about Laish there, it's a remote place.
Mm-hmm.
And easy pickings, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
So they sought out a place, I think, that they knew that they could have a good chance of taking over.
And you think about that. You think about the bully, the intimidation factor that they have. Not only have they already shown that with Micah, but now they do this to this poor innocent. Well, they're not innocent, but you understand what I'm saying. Unsuspecting city. That's the correct term there. All right. From this point onward, anytime you hear the word Dan in the Old Testament, it's always going to be idolatrous. It just is. It becomes a stand. Just as Ephraim becomes the token tribe of the northern kingdom, as Israel is known as Ephraim oftentimes, Dan is the term that we often see that is equated with idolatry. All right. Any other thoughts, any other points down through chapter 18? We may begin chapter 19. We may not get through it. Again, that will be fine if we don't. But let's just look at the first question. Let's establish at least the foundation of what it is that we'll be studying. Someone summarize to me some of the events that has ultimately brought a Levite and his concubine to the city of Gibeah. Because they don't just arrive there immediately. There's other things that has transpired. What's the first thing that happens between the Levite and the concubine in chapter 19? All right, she's played the harlot, and she has gone back where? To Bethlehem. Now, are you catching, again, some irony here? Where had the Levite come from in chapter 17? He had come from Bethlehem to the hill country of Ephraim. Where is the Levite in chapter 19? He's in the hill country of Ephraim, and he's having to go where? To Bethlehem. Just again, the parity here, or not the parity, but the repetition that we see oftentimes. All right, so she's done this. She's gone back to her father's house. He goes to the father-in-law to do what? To bring her back home. All right, how did that work out for Samson when he went back to the father-in-law's house to retrieve his wife? Didn't work out very well for Samson. It's not going to work out very well for this Levite, is it? So the Levite gets to his father-in-law's house, and the father-in-law ends up doing what with him for a period of about 5 days? Oh, he's a very hospitable man. Stay with me. Stay with me. Eat, drink, and be merry. And I mean, if there's the philosophy of life, again, is let us do what is right in our own sight. Well, if we're left to our own devices, what more then is there in this life than to eat, drink, and be merry? That's all this life is, if there is nothing outside of this life. So that's what he does for a period of 5 days. And finally, on the 5th day, the Levite says, look, I've got to get back home. I've got to get back home. So they make their way northward. And as they journey northward, they come to Jerusalem, but they're not willing to stay there. Why? It's not Jerusalem just yet. It's the Jebusites are there. Those are foreigners. They're not natives. And we don't want to intermingle with them. We would not find hospitality with the foreigner. And again, just eat up with irony here that, what if they would have stayed there? All right? They don't go there, but they end up going where? To Gibeah. And when they get into Gibeah, they've arrived later in the evening, and not finding a place for themselves, they go where? To the square. And when they're finding rest there in the square, an older man who's not a Gibeonite, he's a what? He's an Ephraimite. The Ephraimite comes to him and he says, what? What are you doing here and where are you staying? You're not going to stay here. You got to go stay where? You got to go stay with me in my house. Does any of this so far remind you of any other event, any other narrative that happens in the story of the Bible? Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. So think about this. If you never, I didn't know this until somebody pointed it out to me. But if you look at Genesis 19 and Judges 19 in the Hebrew, they have the same amount of Hebrew letters or words, 69 in both accounts. Do you think that's by chance? Because in both accounts, what really happens? Well, it doesn't go as negatively in Genesis 19, except the city has brimstone and fire brought down upon it the next day. But what we really see in this historical account, what we're seeing in this event, is how deprived the Israelites have become. It's not the outsiders. Again, that was where we started our lesson this evening, is who was the greatest enemy to Israel? It's not the Jebusites, it's not the Philistines, it's themselves. It's their own choice not to yield and submit to God. All right. They're about to ring the bell, so I'm going to end there. I think that's a good place for us to stop. So we're going to start at number 10 on these questions, but then we're going to look at the remainder of chapter 19 and then chapters 20 and 21 next week. So we'll finish up the book of Judges next week. The following week, we will look at the book of Ruth in its entirety. So it'll be a short but quick class and brief overview of Ruth, and then this quarter will be ended because the following week will be our gospel meeting. Thank you so much for your kind attention this evening.
Before the invitation, we'll sing number 146, Have Thine Own Way, Lord.
Holy.
146. So I'd like to go ahead and preface the story that I'm about to talk about. If it feels like it's incomplete, that's because it is. I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about because it was a blacklisted site for social media. When I joined the union, the first place I ever went to was Browns Ferry. Now that was really cool, but it was also kind of scary. So this is gigantic building with a big old gate with barbed wire cameras and everything that you could think of. There's towers that guards stand in, and at 5:45 in the morning, you walk in the front, and there's some metal detectors, bomb detectors, and guys with AR-15s. So you couldn't really do anything stupid there. Now, the first day that we got there, we had to go through a tour of the whole place. And in this big building, there's a bunch of different areas that you're allowed to go to. Sometimes you may have to go work somewhere, may have to go retrieve something and take it to a different spot. But when we went to this certain area, we went through the door. We're getting the rundown of what's going on in there, what all's there, what you can and can't touch, because if you touch certain things, it could cause a problem. Now, everything is safe and fine if everything is in proper working order. But they told us if something goes wrong and we're inside that building, the doors are locked automatically. You cannot get out until the situation is resolved. So everything's really cool, taking in all the things to see, really excited. Then you hear that, your skin starts to crawl a little bit. I don't know how many of you know about Chernobyl, but that was a nuclear disaster. And that was something I thought was really interesting in about 8th grade. So I knew all about it. That immediately starts running through my head. Now, also at the same time, I thought about it spiritually. Heaven is open to anybody and everybody who wills to go there and who does what they're supposed to do. But can those doors be locked for us? If you would, turn with me to James 3. James 3. Now, we have the Bible today that has a bunch of stories and examples for us to follow. It has some rules and regulations that we're also supposed to follow, some warnings, life advice, etc. And just a few examples of those. In James 3, the untamable tongue, it tells us that it can burn a fire can burn a whole forest down, but the tongue is about the same. And then if you would turn with me to Matthew 7, Matthew 7, and we'll look at verse 15. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. So there's a few warnings for us there. But then if you will look down a little farther, in verses 21 through 23, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So the doors of heaven can be shut to us if we do not do what we're supposed to do. But how do we know that's true or not? If you would turn with me to 2 Timothy 3, and we'll look at verses 16 and 17. 2 Timothy 3, verses 16 and 17. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. So this evening, how are you doing in your walk with God? If you have not started that, or if you've stumbled on your way, if there's any way that we can assist you tonight, would you please come forward as we stand and as we sing?
see that we can come together and be with one another and study again from your word. Thank you for our teachers here, preachers and elders and deacons. So blessed with many good workers here at Singing River. Thank you for this opportunity tonight that you've given us. We pray that you will be with us this remainder of this week to give us of any sins